Driverless cars could be on Ontario roads as soon as the new year. Joining us now to detail what an Ontario without drivers might look like. Here's Christine Oram, transportation reporter at the Financial Post. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Steve.
When you first heard about this, what'd you think?
Well, I thought it was a pretty smart move by the Ontario government, and we've been hearing a lot about the auto industry recently, especially around the Trans-Pacific Partnership talks, and what that could mean for the industry. And we had Unifor, the union that represents auto workers, saying it could mean the loss of up to 20,000 jobs in Ontario because of the fact that Canada's auto market would be opened up to a lot of other lower-cost jurisdictions. So then the question becomes, how do you compete? And I think this is not exactly a wholesale answer to the problem, but what Ontario needs to do is be on the front lines of new technologies like self-driving cars. And it's actually done quite well so far. We have the cluster in Waterloo of tech companies that are good at this kind of thing. And so the question is, how do you stay good, of course? And so the government decided that what we want to do is make Ontario the very first province in Canada that will allow testing of self-driving cars, not just on campuses in controlled situations, but actually on public roads. And so that's starting January 1st.
They're selling this as a job creator. Do you see it that way?
Well, it is and it isn't. I know that's sort of a nothing answer, but the way it will help to create jobs is that it will prevent jobs from leaving, if that makes any sense. So right now, as it stands before these new regulations come into place, if you are an Ontario-based company, and there are 100 approximately companies and institutions in Ontario that make self-driving technology or connected car technology, you actually have to go stateside or to Europe to test that right now, because there's no way to do that legally in Canada. There are 3 or 4 states that allow testing, but currently nothing in Canada. So the temptation is for these tech companies that make this technology and these auto parts companies that make this technology to go to the States. And if you have to do your testing there, then the theory goes you might as well move jobs there as well, production there as well. But if you can do the testing at home in Ontario and you already have a base here or you're located here, then it makes sense to stay here.
It saves those, but one wonders, as you go further down the road, and it's not just little cars that we're talking about, but perhaps big transport trucks, if you see a whole kind of industry disappearing, like the truck driver, gone.
Or taxi drivers would be another example. Yeah, no, that's true. And I think the question is it inevitable? And if it is inevitable, and whether we're talking about 10 years from now, 20 years, 30 years, if it's coming anyway, do we need to be on the front lines of it? And I think the answer is yes, because this is such an important technology. This is where the jobs of the future are going to come from in developing this technology. And so if Ontario can make it appealing for those companies to stay here and test their technologies here, then that's not going to hurt the industry in the long run.
I know it's a bit of a ridiculous thing to say in a city where it can take more than an hour to get anywhere, but sometimes driving is fun, actually. Do you think commuters, as a general rule, are going to go for something where they're no longer in the driver's seat, and not pun intended?
Well, that's a good question. I remember reading the comparison once of self-driving cars today to the way the automobile was seen in the very early days versus horse-drawn carriages. And it was, will we have no more need of horses anymore now that we have a car? And the answer is mostly yes, but people who like to ride horses for fun still ride horses for fun, racing and dressage, whatever. So down the road, you might have a situation where if you're commuting, you don't want to, it's not fun driving in traffic on the highway to and from work every day, right? So that you could do in a self-driving car, you can get work done while you're doing it. But if you want to go out on a track on the weekend to drive around in a high-performance sports car for fun, you could still do that potentially.
Gotcha. Part of the attraction to this is that these things supposedly will have fewer accidents than those, real people driving cars. Have people thought through what the implications on the auto insurance industry might be because of that?
Well, that's a very interesting concern right now. And again, we could be talking about many, many years down the road.
Sure.
But already we have a lot of autonomous technology in vehicles. So there are cars now that they can park themselves. They can sense if a car up ahead is stopping suddenly on the highway and take control from the driver and brake if the driver doesn't respond quickly enough. There are headlights that curve around corners so you can see better at night. There are a lot of of these technologies already existing in cars that have already dramatically lowered the rate of accidents and fatalities, both in Canada and the United States and in Europe as well. So already that's having implications for the auto insurance industry because it's lowering premiums, but also on the other hand, lowering the amount they have to pay out. So if we're talking about a future where accidents are virtually non-existent potentially.
It's amazing. I mean, think about that.
It is
That's
amazing. And that is the goal. That's what companies like Google are talking about, making a virtually accidentless future. So in that case, do you have any need for auto insurance? And the answer is probably, but in a much smaller form than auto insurance is now. So basically, you might need to insure your car against the possibility of a tree falling on it, but you wouldn't need to insure it against the possibility of an accident necessarily, which means you'd be paying a lot less, and the auto insurance companies would be making a lot less in revenue as a result of that.
But you think about as well, hospitals. I mean, so much of what comes through the door at hospitals are people who've been banged up in car accidents. If that's no longer the case, I mean, imagine the potential savings in healthcare as well. I mean, the list goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's why, that's Google's push in their development of self-driving cars to create a future where that kind of thing is basically eliminated. But I was actually at a speech that Google's director of self-driving cars gave back in January, and he said, the problem is going to be that people will have an expectation that self-driving cars are 100% safe. And there's always going to be a small risk of accidents happening for whatever reason. And so one fatality in a year will be seen as a huge scandal, even though now it'll be eliminating millions potentially. Yes. But the danger of even one happening could reflect very badly on the industry down the road.
We've got 20 seconds left here. As you look down the road, has anybody got any guesses as to how much these things will retail for when they eventually get out there?
That's a very good question, but I think the other question for consumers is, will we be sharing them? Because there's less need to own your own car. If you're able to share self-driving cars, you take one somewhere, it picks someone else up, takes them back. They're sort of tooling around the city, potentially moving people around. That's a possibility, which might mean, even if the car is more expensive, there's less need for individuals to own one.
Talk about disruptive technology, eh? Amazing. Christine, thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.